times I wonder what mischief Jupe would be doing now if she had been allowed to grow to adulthood. I miss you, Jupe.
All right, welcome back. It's the Roman Anton Podcast, and I have my guest Tom Crowley here today. I believe in an earlier version of this, Tom, I asked if I was pronouncing that correctly, Crowley, and you said it was...
It's a Gaelic name, so Crowley can be pronounced different ways, but you have to know Gaelic to get it right. So Crowley's good.
And I asked if you spoke Gaelic.
No, not at all. I played with it, but I can't traverse that.
Okay, so now I'm sort of shooting from the hip as to what we discussed. We have already done a visit to a favorite spot of yours in Bangkok, or a spot that you like, which is called the Mercy Center. The Mercy Center is a couple of miles away from here in a part of town we call Klung Toi. And we went there this morning, you mean Frank and Rath, for a memorial service for a friend of yours, which was very touching, I thought, and you gave a nice presentation at that. I forget the gentleman's name.
Mick Maloney.
Mick Maloney, for those of you listening, that name should resonate with folks, music fans around the world. A well-known musician, played the mandolin and other instruments, and you had the good fortune of knowing him and traveling with him back to his home country and possibly your home country of Ireland. I think you're from the United States, but you have that country in common. So that was a nice visit this morning. So thanks for inviting us along to that visit. But we have you here today to talk about many things, one of which is your new book, or relatively new book, Mercy's Heroes. You have a series of books that you've written that have come out. We're going to talk about this, but we're also going to talk about a little bit about your history and the events leading up to your writing this book, which you finished last year, or it came out last year, started in 2020 or so, earlier.
Yes.
But you've written a series of other books beginning with, and I'm excited to get today, Bangkok Pool Blues, because I couldn't find this because unfortunately this company did go out of business a while back, but I have your complete collection now. So
out of ranks and said, listen, you can have a chance to do this. Do you want us to put your name in? Then I went to advanced infantry training, which is at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and graduated from that. And then I spent 6 months there before OCS called, and I went down to Fort Benning, Georgia. And the stop after getting my commission was in Augusta, Georgia, Fort Gordon, which was a terrible place to be. It was a backwater. Maybe It still is. And then I volunteered to go to Vietnam. And actually, the Army plays these games. I volunteered because I knew I was going to go, but also I wanted to get into the 101st Airborne Division, which I'd read about when I was a kid. And the recruiter said, yeah, no problem. Just sign here. And then when I got to Vietnam, actually I was very lucky. They put me with the 25th Infantry Division, which was an excellent division and still is. And, and I spent my year in Vietnam as a platoon leader and then as a staff officer.
Yeah, I mean, that's the part that was really amazing to me, is because it seemed like, three things. So I'm referring back now. I have to jump around a little bit here to orient, hopefully, folks that are listening. And this is why I would say early on in this podcast is Tom has many books out that we're going to talk about, but one is called Shrapnel Wounds, which I think is the most autobiographic, except for the Pool Hall book, which I haven't read because I wasn't able to find it, which you were kind enough to bring to me today here. So I don't know how you got a copy, but you must know the owner, huh? So Bangkok Pool Blues will probably change part of my perception of Tom here, because I think this was the first of the sort of semi-autobiographical pieces, but Shrapnel Wounds certainly is autobiographical, right?
Yeah.
And it was a real interesting look at how your decision-making was happening And what your goals and objectives for enlisting were in 1966?
No, I enlisted in 64.
64, right? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I should remember that date.
And the way the world worked back then was that they had the draft. And everybody, I was working class background, was expected to go into the service, or you'd be drafted. I had 4 brothers in my family. One went into the Air Force, one went into the Marines, and another brother and I went into the Army. So,
Yeah, wow.
things have changed.
Yeah, full service family, right? And so I get to this quote on page 70 of, this is a crazy thing, so I'm looking at an electronic version. It says page 70. It's probably page 10 if I bought it. But so I don't know what page it's on in real life. I wanted to go to the 101st Airborne Division in Vietnam, he said, referring to the gentleman you're talking to on the other side of the desk. He said, "No problem, Lieutenant, sign here." So I signed, which seems to be the domino of the trust, your trust in the faith around you, that you would be going where you wanted to go, or where they were saying you were going, right?
You gotta face up to it. The Army uses you, the system uses you, but if you are making a career, you learn to manage the use.
Right.
And it's a process. And if you have the right background, if you're West Point, if you're smart enough to figure it out, you learn how to manage what happens to you. I was still young and innocent at the time.
And so you weren't West Point by your own
No.
admission moments ago, that you came in through a different route, and you actually went in through a route where you had to say, I'm even qualified to move on to this officer's school. So
Yes.
you broke the stats down, and I thought, wow, this is, this snow is rolling downhill on you here. The odds are low that you're going to avoid getting bumped out, but you seem to make those hurdles, and then you said, in exchange for that largesse, here's where I'd like to go. And they said, yeah, wink, wink, nod, nod, sure. And maybe you were a little naive, maybe not. Maybe it could have happened, who knows? But you started to go down this ever narrowing path, which was going to lead to you going deeply into Vietnam. Right. And as I read this book, I think the opening section has a chapter that I thought, wow, this reads so much like Hemingway in a certain way. I think your opening page, you I'm sure you've had many versions of this book that you drafted early on, but on the first page, are you in the plane flying in, and there's some dramatic action? Is that the opening section of this book?
Well, in the plane coming from the States, there were a bunch of us, NCOs and junior officers mostly. At that time, they were still sending the troops in troop ships, which is amazing. But it was pretty quiet, but there was a lot of bravado talk by some of the young officers. And I remember one officer, several rows behind me, a junior officer, my same rank, second lieutenant, spouting something about, well, the least I'm going to do is get a Bronze Star.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, the stupidity of that statement is overwhelming.
Right, and that detail alone, so I remember that, and I remember that as if I just read it, which I sort of did, but so to get back to my earlier discussion, your first job wasn't writing. It may not even be a job of yours. It just may be something you like doing and are very good at. You did the writing of this book much later than the actual facts, and the writing of this book and Shrapnel Wounds much later. And you have a stunning descriptions throughout these early stages, even before you're in Vietnam, making your way there, about training school. Could you talk to me about your process for that? Is this all memory, or did you have to sit down? Did you call folks? And I know you provide some reader notes to give some guidance as to who the people who surrounded you are, but I think the reader notes for Mercy's Heroes are different than Shrapnel Wounds, right? Yeah.
Exactly. No, in terms of the process, while I was going through it, I wasn't thinking, this fact or that fact or this experience or that experience. It's just that at that period of time, the country at war, being, lifted into that environment, these were dramatic things happening, and they left an impression, they left a memory. Even the train ride from Milwaukee to the fort in Missouri where we were getting our basic training, Fort Leonard Wood. There was fellas I knew from high school on the same train and others, and we talked. And one of them said to me, I said, what do you think about all this? And he said, I'm just going to shut my mouth, do what they tell me, and get through this and get back home. And I don't know, maybe because I had a rough beginning in life, I was thinking to myself, no, that's not the way I want to do it. I'm going to go all out. I'm going to do, 100% effort. Anything that comes up, I'm going to bust it. I'm going to make it. And so maybe that assisted the process of remembering things, because I wasn't dismissing the experience. I was embracing it fully. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've written that theme in saying you weren't going to sit back as much as you had to sit back for a lot of it and wait or were bored or did things or got shot at. I mean, but that was sort of out of the control that you're talking about here. But it was very interesting for me to read this and just sort of see you getting these facts from a period of time that's in your early part of your life, but putting together in a way that was so easy to follow and enjoyable to follow. I mean, I thought, how long is he going to do this? But the progression through those periods of time were important to understand how you got there. Because when I was reading this, well, even the Union Station in Milwaukee, I thought I didn't know people took train rides to go anywhere out of Milwaukee Union Station.
Way back when.
Right. And
I was excited. It was a train ride. I'd never had a train ride.
And your parents drove you to the station and you had the coffee before, right? And you sort of, I can picture that one was just heartbreaking, sitting there thinking, you're 18 and you want to go.
Yeah,
and they're looking at you like, you lunkhead, what have you done?
Yeah. Well, and the war was just starting, and separately when I went back before going to Vietnam, it was on the news, the famous picture of the Marines burning a village up in the northern part of South Vietnam, where the Zippo incident, where they took the Zippos, etc. That was on TV. It really shocked people, and some of my family had seen that, and they were convinced I was going to my death. Yeah. And I said, hey, don't worry, man, I got it.
Did you believe that? Don't worry, man, I got it?
The arrogance of all the training. There is no more arrogant group than an OCS group. Everything that we went through, we got our commissions, we got our gold bars, then we went through jump school. A good number of us went through Ranger School. You thought you were Superman. Yeah. And nobody going to war thinks they're going to die. Nobody.
That's not how this comes off as arrogance. So you edited out the arrogance if that's what you were thinking. If the thought you just said was actually what you were thinking about that section in the book, it didn't come off that way. There was some confidence on the training, and there were many times where you said, I was looking forward to using my training, and I thought, wow, that seems so strange that he's actually saying I'm relying on the things I was taught to do these next steps, right?
Well, you're well trained, and it's like being a cabinet maker. If you're trained, you know how to do it. It's just the arrogance is something I've come up with later years, because I'm looking back at myself and saying, wow, you must have been an arrogant young guy, because you just thought, I'm gonna beat this. I'm gonna bust it.
Well, and here it goes again. This is you. This is on page 78 if it matters, for a iPad user turning the thing sideways. How ridiculous is that I have to try and explain myself? There are times in life when you're confronted with a decision that will affect the remaining course of your existence. Okay, I'm with you. Sometimes, maybe many times, the need for such a choice arises abruptly. For me, such a moment came. Do you know this section?
I know where you're going. Yeah. I know. Believe me.
For me, such a moment came on the first morning of my tour. Assignment to Vietnam was inevitable for an infantry officer, so I had volunteered for duty there, hoping to be allocated to the 101st Airborne, which was considered one of the U.S. Army's elite. The assignment was what I had been promised by the recruiting officer from the Pentagon who had visited my base in the States. In any case, it was given that I was to go to one of the infantry divisions and receive an assignment as a rifle platoon leader. And so you're moving down the path that you sort of selected and negotiated your way into, right?
Oh, yeah. No, I accepted it. I grew up reading war stories. I remember when I was in 7th grade, I read a story about a trooper who served in the 101st Airborne in Europe. And I thought that was the most wonderful thing in the world.
How old were you when you?
11 years old. It was sixth grade or seventh grade.
So is that age appropriate reading that you're reading that? Probably, right? No.
The librarian thought I was stretching a bit. But
right. So what are you doing here? You're 11 and you're saying, I like this.
I like it. I wish I could remember the title of the book, Soldiers in Baggy Pants. Soldiers in Baggy Pants. And Ross was the guy's first name. And he wrote it about 3 years after the war, 2 years. He died of cancer in 1948 up in Alaska. But the things that he went through, the unit went through, I thought, if I can be one of those guys, I'm somebody.
Yeah. Well, that's even amazing detail you just added to the response there about this gentleman and about 48. And so you have a different set of tools in your head here that spin when you start to recount facts, I think, huh?
I've always had, all my books, all my life. I go back to talk to people about things, and they say, how do you remember that? When I tell them, they remember too. Yeah. But they say, I don't know why. I've got a good memory. Things stick with me.
Oh, good for you. I mean, Frank and I were just talking about that at the Mercy Center, which is out of sequence for this call here. But Frank didn't take his school books home with him, he said. I said, how'd you do so well? Because he was a good student. He said, I don't know. So I think there are folks who get it and there are folks who don't. I never got it, and I still don't probably. So I had to scramble uphill.
Well, it wasn't a conscious process.
Yeah, for sure.
But I always did. I remember in 5th grade, the teacher at the parochial school raised a question about the U.S. invasion of Mexico in 1917, I think, before the war, World War I.
Right.
And she said, she'd given us a reading, and she said, can anybody name the general who is in charge? I was so excited. I raised my hand, I jumped up, and I said, Black Jack Pershing. And she said, what? I said, it was Black Jack Pershing. That's what they called him. And she said it was General Pershing. And she kicked me out of the class.
There you go.
Then the principal checked, and the common nickname for General Pershing was Black Jack Pershing. And I never got an apology, but I was allowed back into class, and the teacher made believe it never happened. So I've always been an omnivorous reader, and facts stick somehow.
Yeah. Well, it's obvious from your writing, and so I'm moving forward in the book, and I have something that's outlined too long, but you said the NCO who called me over, so you're an officer, non-commissioned officer, who had called me over was very urgent in his manner. Lieutenant, you don't want to get into that line, right? So here it is. Yeah. He said, pointing to the assignments just a few feet away. So this is a line, I think you're at the airbase still here in Saigon at this point. Stuff is happening. People are moving all over. It sounds like a massive place. It sounds sort of incomprehensible. And you're about to make possibly the biggest decision in your life. He says something to the effect of, if you get in that line, problems will face you. Give me your papers and I'll do some work to help you out. Get you assigned here to Camp Alpha. So this is Camp Alpha at Saigon Airport. And years later, I would look back on those few seconds and wonder why it was so clear to me that I couldn't take him up on his offer. And this was a done deal. I mean, this was easy line or go off to fight.
Yeah.
That was it. And so if you guys read one section in this book, it's early on. And I was like, no, don't do it. As every, as folks lacking conviction would often do. I would say, oh, come on, just take the break. You can always go back to the other line if you need it. But you met the one NCO, said, hey, sign here. You get there, you say 101st. There's a line they're sending you to. A buddy of yours, not really, someone you knew from before, says, hey, Tom, wrong line. Come over here. And you say, I got this. So the conviction.
Yeah, I don't know where it come from years later, but I flashed on the possibility of spending nights spending all my days at Camp Alpha, and as these guys were doing, in Saigon, getting drunk every night, running around.
Yeah, of course.
Or I'd been trained. I was duty bound. I was honor bound. As I say, it may have been arrogance, but I knew that I could do it. And since reading as a kid, it isn't that I wanted to go kill people or be killed. It's just that I wanted to do the job, to do the right thing. And that, stepping back in any way, I don't know how people who step back handle themselves the rest of their life. So.
Well, once again, I'm astonished at the recollection here, because the themes that you've just articulated are from those very paragraphs. So you used flashed. This sounds like a lot to embrace mentally, but it all just flashed through my mind in seconds. I was absolutely clear when I replied, "Thanks, Sarge. I'll go through my line." He looked shocked and repeated, "Don't do it, sir. Yeah, you'll be sorry. People are getting killed out there." I just told him I have to go through the line. And so the paragraph before was about your training. So you either memorized all of this, which I don't think you did, or it's truly the conviction you had at the time. And it's, I don't know of moments of clarity, if I were to borrow a term from AA or somewhere else, where you can look back at in life and say, well, this was a definitive moment. But that certainly is what you said it was, I think, right?
Oh, it was a definitive moment. And if I had made the wrong choice, I would have ruined my life. I'm convinced of it. And making that choice, what is the phrase they use nowadays? Informed my life.
Right.
So, and I was very clear. Very clear. I didn't see myself as being heroic or anything. I saw myself as doing the right thing.
I was slightly disappointed, but understood I'd been more than a little bit foolish to put any faith in a recruitment officer from the Pentagon. Right.
Anybody is.
So they hand you your papers back, and you're looking down, and it says 25th Infantry Division at Kuchi?
Kuchi.
And you're like, wait, okay, and it is such, all right, I missed that one.
Well, that's the Army.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
And
they decide.
And how old are you at this point? 20, 19?
22.
Okay, so you're accountable.
Yes,
point.
I'm accountable.
Yeah, so I mean, if you're 18, I'd say I wouldn't. Come on, you're not even sure if you packed your socks probably at that point. But
I don't know what I would have done if I was much younger. Yes.
Yeah. So, all right, so you're all in. So I'm sorry if you didn't come here today thinking I was going to spend this much time on this, but I think it's really interesting for an aspiring Tom Crowley reader to check these out. And I'm not saying there's a sequence, but I did your other books first. I did Mercy's Heroes first, and then the Matt Chance, some of them, and I thought, wait, I'm missing some formative stuff here. And then when I saw you're from Marquette and had the Wisconsin stuff, I got excited. But this early history is very interesting, and I'm not going to do much more going through the citations in the book Shrapnel Wounds, but I thought it was extremely well done book. Is there anything else, if I'm sitting here now queuing it up like that you'd want to bring up about this book that because I want to ask about when you wrote it, so maybe I could do a leading question.
It was the third book I wrote. I wrote Bangkok Pool Blues, and then I wanted to try fiction, so I went to Viper's Tale, and then friends said, "Listen, why don't you write about Vietnam, because you have those stories also." I had them on my computer, so I decided to go with that. But that's Viper's Tale. Yeah, you got the cover there.
Yeah, this is a weird way to show stuff anymore, but Bangkok Blues, Viper's Tale, and then your third book was this one.
No, this was the first book.
First book.
Yeah, Bangkok Pool Blues. The second one was Viper's Tale.
Viper's Tale, yeah.
And the third one was Shrapnel Wounds.
Right, Shrapnel Wounds. So,
friends told
guys,
me.
If you're looking for it or if you follow it, it has that picture of a soldier in silhouette on the front.
Yeah.
So third book.
Yeah, I had a lot of those. You're asking how I remember. Throughout the 90s, I'd been putting short bits, maybe chapters or whatever you want to call them, on my computer.
Yeah.
And I had them stored there. And it wasn't that I had an intention to write. It was really that there were things that shouldn't be forgotten. There were men who died who shouldn't be forgotten. And that was my way of holding on to them, holding on to those memories, because people who die in combat shouldn't be forgotten. And it was important to me. And then in 15 years later, when friends saying, "Well, you wrote a couple books, why don't you write your Vietnam memoir?"
Yeah. And
I said, yeah. And we talked about it. Over a drink, we talked about stories. My typewriter friend, and Okay, I said, yeah. Actually, what happened was it was a funny. A bunch of plumbers had come out to work on the plumbing of the British Embassy because they don't let local people work on the plumbing.
Here in Bangkok.
Here in Bangkok, yeah. And
the British don't.
Yeah, the British don't.
We don't know what the Americans do, but we know the British don't.
And my friend Tubanog, who I'd mentioned previously as a writer, he had these guys out for a beer at the old Dubliner when it was on Sukhumvit. And
still there.
Yeah, okay. Well, I came and we spent telling stories. I know how it started. Tu's stepfather was Irish, and he was sunk 3 times in the Merchant Marine in World War II, okay?
Jeez.
And Tu pushed me. He said, you must have stories like that. And so I told a couple of stories, and then the whole group said, this is about 2012 or 13.
Yeah.
He said, you got to write the damn book. Do it. So I said, okay, I'll write it. But I had the things on the computer. I was able to go back. And then once I started writing, it jogged my memory.
Yeah. And so, boy, so many things I want to ask about this. So I'm looking at Bangkok Pool Blues is a Metavisions book.
Yeah, they went bankrupt, unfortunately. It wasn't my fault.
Yeah, got it. So you tried to do what you could for them, but they didn't take your lead. And so the rest, I guess Mercy's Heroes is different, but then you had Down and Out books out of Lutz, Florida for the middle bunch.
Yeah.
And then this last one is Kohler or Keller books. So you're writing on spec? You're just going to start writing after you meet your buddies and you got these stories and you're going to put a book together? Or are you just thinking, I'm going to put more stuff in my computer?
Well, once I had Bangkok Pool Blues under my system, then it was just I wanted to work at the art. I wasn't a writer. I'm still not a writer. But
I think you are. I beg to differ.
Well, so I wanted to play with it. And that's why I went to fiction after Bangkok Pool Blues. That was nice, but I wanted the excitement of fiction. And when I finished that and it was out, that's when my friends pushed me for the memoir on Vietnam. But then I thought, I like my fiction characters. I want to see if I can develop them or what I can do. And so then it went on to the whole series, which hopefully isn't done. So,
knock on wood on that, right?
It wasn't a planned progression. It was just circumstance, and...
Yeah. So we talked about this when we drove to the Mercy Center earlier today, early in the morning, no traffic, pretty easy drive, air conditioned. But here, when you were living here, you made some decisions to streamline it and to move around on the public transport that was available to you. Do you spend a lot of time walking around thinking about plots, or do you spend a lot of time cogitating about this stuff, or is it a fairly flowing process when you get involved?
This is going to sound very... giving myself a very high opinion of myself, but
do it.
Writers talk about inspiration and the muse visiting, and I've never held with that very much.
Yeah.
But what I found as I started getting into the fiction books, especially, was, that's something real. The example I'll give you is Bangkok Gamble, the most recent one.
Right.
It must have been about 4 years ago. I was riding on the train on the BTS and thinking in the morning press that day, they'd had the army fighting against this it's good to get rich monk.
Yes.
You remember he had a secret base
building
here in town?
Yeah.
And they ended up raiding the place.
Yep.
Underneath there was a medical facility, just a real city. And the army was against that because they were afraid that he was going to agitate and raise followers who would overthrow the sacred army. And I thought about that, and I thought, man, there's a story there.
Yeah.
And so then that just started the ribbon. It started the trail, and I started thinking about how do I bring that to life? How do I give it something that readers will find interesting? And I thought, okay, let's just morph into trafficking and have the bad guy be this super monk who was, getting rich off of people and had to run to France where he is now.
Yeah.
And take that as the key part and then play with it. And
so the idea, so Viper's Trail came out in 2013.
yeah, I accept that. Yeah.
Right. Or so it was published then, whatever else happened might have been beyond you. And then Murder in the Slaughterhouse was 2014.
Yes.
So you hit a roll and just stayed on it. So it was almost yearly books for a period of time.
I was on a roll and things were working, but that's when I switched over and did Shrapnel Wounds, I believe it was 2015 or so. So, I'd like to get back on that roll. I was doing a book a year for a while. But even now on this trip, I finished Mercy's Heroes, I finished Bangkok Gamble, and I want to get back to fiction. I'm here hoping that something here will strike me.
The fourth of the Matt Chance
Yeah.
series? So this is your Jason Bourne. This is your, you have a guy now 3 books in who has, as a follower now, I have expectations of my Matt Chance and what he's capable of, right?
Yeah.
I know what type of bike he rides. I know what martial arts he knows, right? I know what type of gun he carries.
Yeah.
His martini, stirred, not shaken, or shaken, not stirred,
He wouldn't touch a martini.
Right, but we know his things, right? We know
Yeah.
the people around him, and they have their own eccentricities.
Yeah.
His 2 buddies.
I don't want him to be a superhero. I want him to be a decent guy who has abilities.
Yeah.
And he's got a girlfriend, but he's single enough that he doesn't feel encumbered about going off when somebody says, "Hey, will you help me?"
To do risky missions that are life-threatening and may make her a single person again.
That's what you get when you go with a guy who runs
Goes
around
off.
and does these
Right,
things.
who gets shot at.
Well, she's independent. She's
Right.
got her own career.
Right.
So he had to have a strong woman who would put up with him.
Right.
So he does, and maybe he doesn't always get what he wants. But.
And so does Matt Chance? Okay, so you are Matt Chance, and this is the proposition I'm putting forward. Although Matt Chance is half Thai.
He's Lukrung, but one of my buddies, my Vietnam battalion, the 4th Battalion, 9th Infantry Regiment, Manchu, keep up the fire.
There you go.
We have reunions every year. In fact, I'm missing this year's for this trip, but it's all guys who served in that battalion during the Vietnam War, and mostly they're infantrymen, because the cooks don't want to come to the annual reunion. They don't identify with the battalion that much. Not that they aren't wonderful people, but one of the company commanders that I talked to, who's a really cool guy, was in combat, and we've gotten to be friends at these reunions. I didn't really know him that well. I saw him in Vietnam. We were talking, it was about a couple years back at the reunion, and he likes the books also. And he just looked at me sideways and he said, "There's a lot of you in there, isn't there?" So I said, "Yeah, there's some of me, but I'm writing fiction. I raise it to different levels."
Well, you even got Matt to work at the Mercy Center, at least work for the Mercy Center, sort of.
He helps out.
Okay.
He helps out.
Okay, so maybe Matt's inspired by activities, but also is fictitious, and you've carried him forward. So let's talk about this, because I think this is what a guy like me, grown up in the shadow of the Vietnam War, wants to ask and probably shouldn't ask. But was Shrapnel Wounds and then Mercy's Heroes, were those difficult books for you to write? Because you mentioned it in your own bio that there's some baggage that came along with your experience in there.
Shrapnel Wounds was difficult.
Yeah.
There's scenes in there, where people died, where mindlessness leadership was in effect. And those were on my computer because they were that difficult, but to me, they had to be remembered.
Yeah.
And so it was difficult. So I was bringing back a lot of really negative memories. And to this day, people don't believe it. People who haven't been in war or know. Somebody asked me, "Well, you don't think of that stuff anymore, do you?" Or very often. And I said, "I remember Sergeant Ray Nixon at least once a week. I remember the guys who died on this occasion and that occasion. Yeah, I do remember it. And the person couldn't believe me. No. Come on. That's 50 years ago. And you're remembering still today. But I think vets who have been in combat remember.
Yeah.
And, it's just like the Devils in Baggy Pants. The guy who wrote that book that I started reading when I was 11 years old, he remembered. He had to write it out.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, is there, in your mind, if I take those examples of those pivotal moments, sign or not sign, switch the line or not, is there a post-Shrapnel Wounds, Tom, now that the story's told? Did that have some cathartic thing to you, or is it just one of your missions you accomplished and it's just...
Well, no, it was cathartic in a sense, yes. I mean, my sister asked me that same question.
Hey, sist.
Yeah. You get that stuff out of your system in that way. Actually, as you know, Mercy's Heroes has two trends in it. One is the story of Mercy, and those kids are heroes. The teachers are heroes, the slum moms. But the underlying trend there, I don't know what the proper title a writer would give it is, but is the recovery from PTSD.
Yeah.
And I had one reviewer who missed that completely, and it really upset me because I thought I painted it fairly clearly. I didn't want to overpaint it, but I wanted people to read it and say, yeah, okay, helping others helps you to heal.
Yeah. I mean, that's such, if you look at the cover, I'm saying, okay, there's Tom at Union Station. But I just thought this is so well done because, I said, wow, the way you tell your Vietnam stories are so tremendously different than the way you write about the Mercy Center. Just the language you use, the facts you recall, the precision and the preciseness, and some of the new and different language you use in the Mercy Center description is interesting because it's not, I'm watching a writer struggling with his writing or his content, but this is a world that he seems much less aware of what he's doing there because he showed up without really an agenda and an assignment and training.
Yeah.
Right? And you obviously come from a post-Vietnam, post-schooling career that was professional at a high level, and so you were switching out of that, probably coffee at your desk every morning at 6:30 as someone set it down to you to taking a motorcycle into work and hoping you get there. And you have these two themes running very clearly to me, and I thought this is such an interesting thing, and I thought this is the linking of this process to what he's doing at the Mercy Center. So the Mercy Center, for those of you who I haven't explained, is here in Bangkok. A couple miles away from where we are right now. We just drove back. It is a charitable institution run by a group of people. It's faith-based or religious, but at the same time it isn't, or it is, or it isn't. And there are folks who live there who are familyless, and there are folks who have family members who aren't capable of caring for them, and then there are other series of folks who live there and study there, and tens of thousands of people have gone through that organization to get educated. And for the 14 years you were there, I'm sure tens of thousands went through on your watch. But you went in by your own admission saying, I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing here. So part of this is a journey very similar to the journey you took in Shrapnel Wounds, and you refer back to it for analogs, I think, right?
Yeah. The common denominator, which is what I think you're leading towards, what ties these things together, and I've talked to my son about it. I don't have any great brilliance, but the one thing that I've had coming from a very poor background was a stubbornness and a determination to get ahead. And what I described that to my son is, in the business world, I was limited. I could only do frontline jobs. I could be a country manager. I had to be overseas. I had to be doing things where I had the languages. Other people didn't do it. So, and the same in the military. I was good because I was a frontline guy.
Yeah.
I would have been a lousy staff officer, I think. I'm not sure. And Mercy's Heroes was going to Mercy was just another step into the front line for me. Now, I knew I wanted to do something different in life. Power plants worth hundreds of millions of dollars are great fun.
Right.
Some of the negotiations you described earlier today, I mean, it's fun dealing with governments at a very high level and having them come to you as the go-to guy, dealing with the Chinese or the Koreans and the head of the utility. And, do they trust me or don't they? Am I a solid guy or not? So that's all great fun, but it's frontline stuff.
Yeah.
And that's what got me. And I think besides knowing I needed some healing, I had PTSD bad. I came to understand the phrase howling at the moon.
Yeah.
I've had several of those incidents way back when. But Shrapnel Wounds was maybe a work of remembrance, of conscience, of insisting that those who've gone before are remembered.
Yeah.
Mercy's Heroes is similar in the sense, but it's a work of love, of the staff, of the kids. You met some humble people today who do great things for kids every day. And that story should be told. And it's not just this little hut in the Jetsip Rai slum. They expanded from the school program to sheltering kids, getting up into the hundreds. They had an AIDS hospice. They had a community outreach program, which they still have. Yeah. It's a magnificent organization, which I didn't realize till I was writing the book.
Yeah.
And it all came into focus.
Yeah, I sensed there was as much of awareness-raising moment on your own service, which is 14 years. I mean, it's sort of, you got to know your job after 14 years, but what you're getting out of it and what it means and how it puts together, obviously, you wrote it down and you started even characterizing it differently as you went through the book, and I thought, this is very interesting to watch this. And this is a guy, so let's do the chronology quickly. Born at a period of time where you made a decision, 66 or 64, to enlist, so we can guess the ages there. And that piece of history ends 70-ish. And you go to school. You go to Marquette, and then you go to Johns Hopkins, and you get an advanced degree, and it seems like there's a diplomatic piece to this. So we're still not sure, is he going to go in, is he going to get out, how's this going to work? But it takes you on for a while on a consulting and then a corporate path.
Yes.
And then whatever events happen, we all know history. There's economic downturns, economic upturns. You're a smart guy. It's a world event may or may not impact what job you're going to take, but you say, wait a minute, right about the turn of the millennium, I'm going to do this charitable run for a while, not knowing how long you're going to do it when you go in, right? 14 years.
Well, it's the point you made earlier. I'm in the line at Camp Alpha, and it was a watershed moment. Where am I going with my life? And the downturn gave me that sort of thing. I could have gone to Europe.
1998 economic downturn.
Yeah, I was offered a job in Europe by some very nice people. I had some great bosses who said, hey, we're shaking this thing up. You want to come? And I would have been in Eastern Europe and doing the same thing. Or what? Right. And, I thought, wow, it's time to look at or what.
Wow, that's so radical. So was it General Electric? Can I say that out loud? You were working at General Electric then?
You can say it out loud and they'd be happy. But at the time, I was with a firm called AES.
Okay. So
and it's Applied Energy Systems.
Right.
And they specialized it was build, own, and operate plants.
Yeah.
And they specifically tried to do clean coal plants.
Nice. Think of that. You were revolutionary before the revolution, right?
I was very lucky to run into them. I was recruited back into that world, and they were one of the ones who offered me Hong Kong, China, and that business. Good people.
Wow. China, 98. Coal
it was
plants.
Great. It was great. Well, I went to China in 94 and was in Hong Kong from 94, and then I came here in 96, and then 98 came the crash here. So 2 years in China.
So it's interesting. I mean, and so I think we've almost pieced together the entire sort of train here then. So we got this 98 and you go to Mercy, and so you're now living in Bangkok, and you're making your way into what we call the sort of Klung Toi area. It has different nicknames. I think you use slum. I think that's a pretty traditional use of the word here. I'm sure there are parts of the world would say that's not woke enough to use that word, but that's what it says on the map here and in Google, and so I think you and I use it, so we apologize for our word choices here. Or he doesn't. I do. I apologize for his. But that's what we call it, and so you spend that time here, and then you make a decision to go. And did you move back to the States after that decision?
Oh, no. It was just the opposite. Then I was committed to being here. You mean with Mercy and all this?
Yeah, so you're there for 14 years, and then you leave Mercy at some point.
I left Mercy on a day-to-day basis in 2012. A couple of reasons was, one big one was the writing. Yeah. I was really starting to write more and more. And also I found that what I was doing there could be done on a part-time basis. I kept working on proposals. There's a group called Caritas Austria, which was giving us money, maybe 50,000 euros at a time, but the proposals had to be just right. Right. And the reports had to be just right. And it was like the tsunami. I was lucky. Right. I was the only person in the company who could pull that stuff together.
Maybe in the city.
Yeah. Caritas Austria is a tough group, let me tell you.
Right, they're not going to take every submission.
Yeah. And so I kept that. It was a part-time job, I guess. And the writing was part-time.
So I'm curious about this. So you're moving into writer mode now. You're writing on a laptop. You get up in the morning. Is there officer style? Is it a perfect place for it? If the cord's crooked, you got to straighten it out. And if the light's not right, you can't write, and you yell at the maid.
You probably know this. This is stuff they ask at writers' conferences when you're sitting up on the panel. Right. But every writer is different. You know, Hemingway would get up at 5 a.m. and he would complete his writing by 8 or so.
Standing up, right? Typing.
Yeah. The rest of the day was his thing. So everybody's different. I found that I had to get up, have a cup of coffee, have my breakfast. Then I had my computer on the side, and I would go down, sit down at the computer, and just let it flow. What ideas would occur to me at nights, like I've got Matt Chance in the Jungle. I think this is from Viper's Tale. Yep. There's bad things going down the trail. He tells, the park ranger, the old guy, stay here, wait for me, and I'm going to go check it out. The park ranger says, Matt, don't do that. And he says, I'll be back.
There's ghosts in this wood.
Yeah, there's ghosts in this wood. And there's ghosts in woods up in northern Thailand. You find people.
Probably in Wisconsin as well.
Yeah. So he goes down, and so the question during that night's sleep is, how the hell am I going to get Matt out of these woods? Right. How am I going to make something worthwhile that the reader will like, but will, seem plausible, but still adventurous? And then the next morning, I was able to sit down at the computer and say, okay, there's going to be a shootout, just a couple of guys. Matt's going to hit somebody. He's going to be chased. He's going to escape. And then I would just flow. Yeah. I would just flow with ideas. And then everybody rewrites the next day. Yeah. I'd like to meet the person that doesn't, though I've heard there are people like that. But first thing you do the next day is you go back and look at the last chapter you wrote. Yeah. And say, does this still make sense, or do I want to amp it up, or whatever? So I was learning on the run. I wish I would have been in writer school at the age of 18 in Iowa, but it didn't happen that way. So, yeah,
I mean, there's a lot bundled up in that comment. But it's good to hear that it sounds like you've been on the road and have had book-related things you've attended. And had groups of curious people saying, hey, how can I do what you do, right?
One of the writers I asked for advice early on, and I'm not going to name him because I don't really like his stuff, and he's here in Bangkok, but he was very kind to me, and he's a bit of a name. And he said, Tom, join all these groups in the States. Join Mystery Writers of America. Join the International Thrillers, and go hang out, talk to people, get ideas. It was good advice. And
did you do it?
I did it, yeah, of
Get
course.
Out of here.
You push me, I'll go. Okay. I'm airborne. the Mystery Writers of America.
Wait, what was you had, Matt Chance has a slogan he uses to verify himself to his friend and vice versa. John, it's what Rangers do. What is it?
Yeah, that's
what. Going first. What is it?
Yeah, that's what Rangers do. Rangers always go first.
Yeah, that's if someone
Rangers
gave a
model.
message, we always go first. Then you knew it was from your buddy, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's the real thing. I mean, I've got buddies who are Rangers and one who retired as a lieutenant general, but Rangers always go first. But the deal is that, I went to Mystery Writers of America. I think 2011 was my first conference, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was just wandering around talking.
Where was this?
Cleveland, Ohio, and
Nice.
I got to go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame at the same time.
Bonus.
You would have loved it. You would have loved it. I mean, there's some amazing people there and some amazing things,
Yeah, for sure.
I really enjoyed it. But the session, there was a session on Thailand. And again, I won't name the writer because I've got issues with him. I don't know that writers all have their own view.
Yeah.
And this guy's got that view, this guy's got that view. And I appreciate the craft, but I'm writing from my point of view and my sort of style. But the guy, I was talking to the publisher, this guy next to me, turns out he was just starting a publishing house.
Nice.
This was Down and Out.
Down and Out.
Yeah, and we just started jostling each other, and somehow we got onto political views, and we found out we're in the same boat. Nice guy, and then he told me he's starting this. I said, would you mind if I send you a draft? Actually, I'd already had Viper's Tale published in Thailand.
Yeah.
But the publisher Meta went bankrupt
Right.
and finished. So I had the rights to the property.
Okay.
I explained it to him, and I said, I need to work on it a little bit. I want to improve it, but can I send it to you? I sent it to him, and he said, yeah, I'll help you print it. Let's get this
Interesting.
done.
So is he still in business, Down and Out?
Any book I send him, he'll publish, and he's got about 30 authors.
Oh, nice. So he's in Lutz, Florida?
Lutz, Florida, yeah.
Was that north or south, middle?
About 30 miles north of Tampa Bay, I think.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Fun. Good area.
Yeah, a good area.
What's his name?
Oh my God, you're asking me. I've got emails on my computer.
Sorry,
Eric Campbell.
Eric Campbell. Shout out to Eric Campbell at Down and Out Books, Lutz, Florida, for seeing a genius sitting next to you at Cleveland, Ohio conference in the Writers Ball.
No.
Well, that's cool. So that one strikes me as odd based on what little I know about your personality, but I could see you going in there and sitting next to the owner of the book company.
It's what you got to do. It's
Yeah.
what you got to do.
Yeah, but you could have sat next to the guy who makes sandwiches and is writing his first book, who I'm sure would be awesome, and you guys would have played pool together and had fun.
Yeah.
But you sat next to the company owner.
That crowd loved Bangkok Pool Blues. And at that time, I was part owner of a pool bar in Bangkok.
Which one? Can you say?
God, I'm trying to think of the name we get. Which one was it?
So we got a hustler in the room here. So just in case.
Oh.
There may
You
be
shoot
other
pool?
meetings.
Efren, huh? Efren Reyes? Yeah, I know. I met him many times. The Philippine pool players are really some of the best in the world, and you too, I'm sure.
There we go.
9 ball, 8 ball, 10 ball. What do you play?
Anything.
9 is the big game.
Yeah.
The hustlers want to play 9 because they get it over with quickly.
There you go.
Yeah, let me play. Most Filipinos want to play 9 ball. They want to bet. They want to make their money. They hate a game called One Pocket. One Pocket takes forever.
One pocket.
Yeah, and I've got a buddy who's a One Pocket expert, an American older guy. He doesn't shoot much else, but when he goes to the Philippines, they want to play. He insists on One Pocket because he can win.
I'm going to call your secretary to cancel all future meetings. There's about to be a weekend of gambling and pool. But anyway, so you were down at the conference and you're figuring it out and you're getting some stuff, but you're got the place in Bangkok, and so you're trying to figure this out in a systematic way, like you approach problem solving from the military or from the energy plant formula, but it has some weird things. So do you keep in notes or you keep it in your head?
Well, for the books, you mean?
Yeah.
Or
I know you write stuff.
I do keep notes. Yeah. If things occur to me, I'll say, I want to use that in the next book.
Yeah.
I can't give you an example, right? Well, the monk I told you, the happy monk,
right.
And things like that will hit me, and I'll write that down and see if I can use it next time. And the same, Viper's Tail. That was the first. Hint of what we've just gone through.
COVID. Yeah, no, it's
COVID.
Astonishing. So
Did you see that, huh?
yeah, no, it's ridiculous. So Viper's Tail, I'm reading this. This is his first book, Frank. And I'm sitting, wait a minute. Chinese, whoever. Airborne illness, released intentionally. You called this one. You called this one 10 years earlier. True or not, it was so stunningly close. But then the way you introduced it in the book, I thought was very creative because you put these two historical pieces, World War II time, about things that were happening, and you sort of left them open.
It started out, I wanted to do military history. I've done military pieces, History Magazine. But the original idea was to talk about the Japanese Kempeitai and the concentration camps they ran during World War II and the horrible things they did. And I was writing on that, and I thought, it isn't coming alive. Why don't I use this as part of a fiction book?
Yeah.
And that's, then I thought, okay, the trail started with the Japanese right-wing organization, descended from the Kempeitai. And there is still today a very strong right-wing group in Japan, militarists. But take that and say, okay, are they still people who would want to build on their loss in World War II and punish the Chinese? And I said, let's take that as a fantasy and run with it.
Yeah, interesting, because I understood that. And so a biological warfare issue that runs into almost spot on the descriptions of COVID and what would happen if this thing hit the streets. The contrasts were obvious to me, and it was very interesting to see. And I imagine you felt fairly justified or vindicated in picking your themes as relevant and not too fancy or fantastic or some that could never happen, Tom, and you're like, well, so wait a minute. And you sort of, I was going to say, for the Bangkok Gamble, I was going to say, I'm assuming it was based on those events in some level, or you've predicted 2 out of 3 very strange things to happen.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. Well, good. So, you have a Matt Chance 4 in your head?
In my head, people have asked me, are you writing your next book? And I've told them the answers. I'm waiting for the ideas to come to me. You can't run after the idea. The idea has to come to you.
But is he out there? Is there going to be...
There's going to be something happening. I like the guy. I like the new heroine. I want her out there kicking ass. Yeah, Jade is going to do stuff.
So let's do this fantasy game then. Who in the world of actresses do you pick to play Matt, and then who do you pick to play Jade?
Oh, Keanu Reeves for Matt.
Okay.
I was asked by someone who does movies.
Okay.
About 5 years ago, I was asked, and
Matt, here you go.
The guy didn't pick me up. He said he told me how to shape the ideas better. But Keanu Reeves was the guy.
Sort of John Wick. Matt Chance.
Yeah. Well, he'd play it different. Keanu Reeves is so sophisticated.
All right.
He can play many things.
All right. Strong endorsement.
Yeah. And they always ask you for the movie, how are you going to put the movie together? What are you bringing together? This is what they apparently do in Hollywood.
Like Forrest Gump meets...
Okay. Black Rain, if you know Black Rain.
Yes, I do know Black Rain.
Black Rain meets... and I think I just threw in Rambo.
Okay.
Just something.
Got it.
Black Rain meets Rambo. And the guy said, okay, I think they say that a lot in Hollywood. Okay, great. Now where do we go? But,
wasn't Black Rain Michael Douglas?
Yeah, and he did a good job.
Very good job.
I'm not a fan of Michael Douglas.
That was young Michael when he was...
Yeah, it was young Michael. He did a good job, and it was a lot of impact. I wish I'd written... you see everything. You wish I'd written that. It was good. And as far as the woman, it's got to be visual. But if you remember, what was the off-planet movie, where they had the blue people living on the...
Oh, right.
There was a woman chopper pilot in that.
Oh, right.
A Latino.
She was on that Lost series as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forget her name.
Tough-looking chick.
Right.
I thought she'd be great, and
okay.
let's
Maybe
put
she's
her in
out
there. Oh, she is. She is. I modeled Jade on an ex-U.S. Army chopper pilot female who flew in Iraq and then got out of the service later.
Where did you meet her? How did you meet her?
At the Mercy Center.
Ah, son of a gun.
She was also coming down as an ex-combat person.
Oh, wait. You do you make mention of her in here?
Probably. Yeah.
Okay.
I've got to be careful. She she won't want to be identified.
Sorry,
but,
strike that, Frank.
I love
Cut
her.
that out.
She's a friend for life. In fact, we were just together this week. She's accidentally visiting Thailand at this time.
Oh, great.
And she gets along with my wife, the two of them. They love each other more than they love me. So.
Most importantly.
Yes.
I think that is the Noi Jade dynamic right there.
Chai.
All right.
Chai.
Okay, well, good. Well, so we've walked through Tom Crowley's sort of sequence of books from 2012 forward, but we realized that from 68 forward, 64 forward, maybe 62 forward, the influences started and the writing was actually happening because it was all churning in your head and getting in this incredible memory you have sort of filed away. So maybe it had to be that way, right? Maybe have one, you can't do the other, or vice versa.
Well,
but
I think you have to have experiences.
Yeah.
And you have to have a world of experiences which impressed you.
I can't tend. It just struck me as odd finding this out after the fact. Your leadership skills that you developed in the corporate world after. Do you think those helped you a lot in getting these done in a certain fashion, or getting these done at all?
The books.
Yeah.
Writing is a lonely road.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds a little pompous, but I really think it's true. You got to cooperate with publishers. You got to cooperate with people. And you've got to be humble because you get rejected so much.
Yeah.
So corporate leadership skills, I don't think so, except I was aware of a world inhabited by those sorts of people.
Yeah. And so were you, and you don't have to admit this if it was happening, so it's let's just say 88, 92, somewhere around there, 88. And you're sitting in first-class lounges, flying around the world, doing projects, business class lounges. You got a laptop, maybe? Maybe not.
No.
Are you writing? Are you putting stuff down? So
nothing. I collected a file at home on Vietnam.
Right, like we all did, right?
Yeah, I've got a big file at home, paper stuff.
Wall Street Journal articles.
Yeah, some CIA stuff I picked up from friends and I've used in...
Not confidential CIA stuff. Not stamped like we're seeing in the press lately, so none of it.
No, nothing stamped, nothing
go.
official, but things told to me by people that I took notes on. And I had close contacts with CIA people growing out of my embassy time. But so I had all these files at home, but I had no intention of writing. It's just that I was interested in the subjects. I was interested in the subjects. And I wasn't working on a computer until whenever we got the big desktop things in 90 or whenever it was.
Yeah.
And so, I worked on that computer and I would store things. But, I guess the iMac was the first one, which is 2010, 2008. I don't know. The big one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
colorful one.
Yeah, that's the first one I had at home.
Oh, okay.
And that's the one I did the writing on then. And now I got an Apple, whatever. Which is nice.
So I don't know what's in here, but let's talk about the pool element to your existence. So I assume you didn't start playing in 2012 when you wrote your first book. There's a history behind that. So when did you pick up pool cue? Was it a military thing, or was it later, or was it part of your thing?
I'm going to answer your question, but I remembered the name of the pool bar. It was Shooters.
Shooters.
Yeah, it's still working. I won't say the soy, but it's still working in Bangkok. One of the original owners is still with it, a Japanese guy who's a good guy.
I thought that was right by the Sheraton, right?
Soy 13.
Right. Oh, no, okay, other side. Wrong.
The one by the Sheraton is Hustlers.
Yeah, okay.
I recommend that as the number one pool place in the world.
Agree?
Hustlers.
That's a
No.
sort of passive agreement.
Yeah, it's passive. Come on down. I'll shoot you.
There you go. That sounded like I don't know. That seems
All
like
the
tough
Filipino players come to Hustlers.
talk. There you go.
All the Filipino players come to Hustlers.
All the Filipino players.
I've seen Efren play there. There's guys that come from the Philippines just to shoot here in Pattaya. In Bangkok, they'll shoot at Hustlers
Frank is very open-minded. He'll play non-Filipino players too.
for money. That's the pool world. You got to understand. I love the pool world, but it's a crazy, crazy world. Anyway, shooters. So you asked about this one. What was the question again? I got excited.
Well, like, so first book, you had Vietnam, you had Mercy Center, you had GE, you had other things you could have written about. This is the one. Is it a big part of your life?
Bangkok pool blues.
Yeah, just pool playing.
I'm addicted to pool.
Yeah. So
I've been out 2 times this week, and I'd go out today if I'm not too tired. I'll definitely be out tomorrow.
you have a table at home?
No, I don't. My wife refused to allow a table in the house.
In the living room. I was going to say living room or dining room.
Yeah. But real pool players are addicted.
Yeah.
And my wife used to ask me, I went out to play pool, and I'd come home 4 hours later.
Mm-hmm.
She said, nobody plays pool for 4 hours. I said, you don't understand. Players can play for 4, 5, 6 hours. I mean, as long as there's a game going, that's good. They'll play. So people are either pool players or they're not. They either understand or they don't. But I'm addicted to pool. I played in high school a little bit. Then I forgot about it. Didn't pick up a cue until 1998. I was working at Hustlers. I was working at Mercy. Walking home, I went past a bar.
Which one?
Soy 4.
Soy 4.
It came to be, well,
Okay.
changed the name because I didn't want her to get angry at me.
Yeah, okay, I got it. Okay, so.
It was a Korean karaoke that went bankrupt. And then they opened it up as a pool bar. Like everything else, it'll come to me in 3 minutes. But I saw the 2 pool tables. She had 4 pool tables, actually, at that time, the madame. And so on the way home, I started stopping, and I'd shoot a few games, and I'd go home. And all of a sudden, I found that I was staying there for 2 hours, and then 3 hours, and it just grew.
Yeah.
And so, ever since then, I've been addicted. I enter tournaments. I'm a lousy player, but
you got your hours in.
Yeah, I got my time in, and I'm working on my shots. So.
Well, interesting. I mean, it seems like these are parallel behaviors that often run together, right? And then the sort of sitting and thinking through, playing a sport, doing your thing. And okay, well, that's interesting. So I've run through the things that I thought about and having my Tom Crowley week. But it was a real pleasure reading what you've said. Have I missed anything you wanted to talk about today, or do you want to talk specifically now about Mercy's Heroes or the Mercy Center or Father Joe or any of the folks you met there? Because I didn't spend a lot of time talking about this one.
Only I'd say this is one of the reasons I wrote Mercy's Heroes is it's known in Bangkok and it's known overseas, but people think, well, it's just another street shelter. It's just a place for kids. Mercy's Heroes, as I started writing the book, as it developed, I talked about people doing work in this area, in that area, in that area, in that area. I joined the Social Workers Association of America because I wanted to understand how these people think.
Just like you joined the mystery writers.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, you go out and get it. And it hit me that this Mercy is unique in the world.
Yeah.
And people don't appreciate it here in Bangkok or anywhere else. It is an extended care facility of the first water. I ask anybody to bring me another private institution, because it is private. The church doesn't fund it.
Right.
That matches up in all the departments that Mercy does. They won't find it. If they do find it, I'll go play pool with them. But they
take their money.
Yeah, they won't find it. So that's the only thing I would say extra is you have to. As I wrote it, I realized just how extraordinary Mercy was. I knew how extraordinary the people was,
Yeah.
but as I started writing it, I realized how extraordinary Mercy was.
Well, and I'm
Yes.
glad you put this out. And that's why I wrote you a year ago or whenever I saw it come out. I'm a fan of Father Joe's. He does his every 3, 4, 6 month article in the Bangkok Post, and they're riveting and they're eye-opening. And so I reached out to get the books that were available on him. Welcome to the Slaughterhouse or something. 3 or 4 of them that I thought were well written. One of which he wrote, I think, putting together some of his op-eds from the Post or other.
Yeah.
Great writer. Some of them are tough to read. But, there's a relentlessness in the notion of the Mercy Center. And there's a fragility to it at the same time that scares me a lot when I think about this institution. And even though it was the first time I was there was today, and so we're out of sequence here. We're going to play this clip where we went today after this. It's so hopeful, at the same time. And it's just such an astonishing group of people in there. You could see it.
Yeah, there is hope. And the staff nurtures it amongst the kids.
Yeah.
And the kids slowly come to realize that there is hope. And then, as Joe puts it, they want to kick down the door,
Right.
which I identify with. Joe and I both came from very poor backgrounds.
Huh.
And one of the reasons we get along so well over the years is we can talk to each other in a language that people who haven't come from a sort of background
Yeah.
wouldn't understand. So.
That's Father Joe Meyer. He's a Catholic priest. He runs with some other folks the Mercy Center and has been here since the 60s.
65, I believe, is
Right.
when he first came. Yes. Yeah.
So beat that. Top that one. That's a healthy run. A good man, obviously, with some good people working for him. But look, Tom, I appreciate your taking almost a full day out of your schedule here to do this with me, but I also appreciate your taking us to the Mercy Center next. I wanted to offer an opportunity for you in the second part of the Roman Anton podcast. We have a performance piece. Now, I've read a couple of quotes out of your books, but I thought they were nice bridges to sort of stimulate some of the discussion we had. Would you mind reading for us out of here? Is that not something you do?
Oh, no, I'd be happy to do
Good.
it. I've attended writers' reading experiences. I saw that there's a range of good and bad.
Yeah.
I don't know where I fit in. I've done it. So I picked out, well, there's several articles, but I picked out one and marked out one that I think is a good story. Well, no, it's a moving story. It's a very sad story, but it's a very mercy story. So, yeah, I'd be happy to read it.
Okay, Frank. Ladies and gentlemen, is part 2 of the Roman Anton podcast. Tom Crowley reading from his own book, Mercy's Heroes, available online everywhere.
Okay. This story is about a girl I fell in love with and ended up with a broken heart, but it's not the conventional tale. The title is The Charming Rascal, Sweet 16, Jup Chang. There are those, especially kids, who somehow manage to charm everyone they come in contact with. Jup Chang was one such girl. Her name, Jup Chang, means seashell, specifically the type of seashell with a pointed bottom spiraling up to an open top, somewhat like an ice cream cone. Jup was one of what Father Joe referred to at times as the AIDS Brigade. He used that term, I think, because when receiving their twice-a-day collection of before-meal pills at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., and exactly on time, they would be lined up like a bunch of troops before the nurse's window. Jup had been living with her aunt for a number of years, and then the aunt said she couldn't care for her any longer. Jup was in her early teens when she came to Mercy, and she was the oldest of the kids in the AIDS Brigade at that time. She had been living untreated much longer than the younger kids. So Jup was an older sister and a leader. However, she was quite sick when she came in. And even though the staff put her on the right meds and worked with her, they all knew, and possibly Jup knew, that it was only a matter of a few years until her body would give in to the illness. Jup was sick enough that she was in bed or only able to walk around Mercy some of the time. When volunteers or visitors came through Mercy and found Jupe, she always had a big smile. The smile was a bit lopsided, which made it even more charming. Plus, coming from her thin, frail frame, it was always a surprise. Most of the kids would give a shy smile, but there was nothing shy about Jupe. She wanted to talk. She wanted attention, and she got it. Whether she was meeting the Mercy staff, volunteers, or the occasional visitors, she would charm them. Father Joe was so taken with Jupe that he would at times guide visitors to the AIDS ward to see the star patient. Jupe was a bright girl, and over time she would learn to use her star power to her benefit. A good example at the time was her interaction with an outstanding Canadian volunteer, Mary McLean. Mary was in charge of the informal music program, and on one occasion stopped by to visit Jupe and entertain her by playing the guitar. Jupe loved it and asked Mary for a guitar. She wanted to learn how to play. Mary did find an inexpensive guitar for Jupe and presented it to her. It became apparent on follow-up visits that being able to play the guitar wasn't really Jupe's goal. Her goal was to get more attention. What the lovable kid wanted was to be loved, and the charm show was her effort to get it. You could say all kids want to be loved and try to attract attention, but young Jupe was very accomplished in that regard. Besides gaining the attention of many of the staff, there wasn't a volunteer who didn't make the excursion to Jupe's bedside or to catch her as she patrolled around Mercy. Mercy volunteers, Tuba Nog, John Pador, and Mary McLean were regulars. In between the work and frustration, there were golden moments at Mercy. One of these special moments involved the AIDS Brigade. Two frequent visitors, Mick Maloney, a noted Irish musician who played the mandolin, and his good friend John Murphy, who performed magically on the Uilleann pipes, were often there to serenade the AIDS kids to sleep at night. It was lovely to see how their music soothed the sickest of kids. Jupe was always on their list of stops. John McTaggart, a volunteer and a Bangkok resident who worked in the medical equipment field, was a frequent visitor and stalwart supporter of the AIDS ward and Jupe. Jupe also had several overseas visitors, journalists, a couple of filmmakers who would find their way to Jupe and others. We even had a relatively young blonde baroness from Germany whose father was a Mercy donor. The baroness was introduced to Jupe, and when Jupe learned that this visitor was considered royalty, she was over the moon. She equated royalty to being a princess, and Jupe wanted to have a princess for a friend. Jupe, with the help of the volunteers, wrote some letters in English and tried to strike up a correspondence with the Baroness after she departed to return to Europe. Unfortunately, as with many visitors, the Baroness wasn't able to respond once she returned home. Jupe was quite disappointed. Initially, Jupe responded to the care she received at Mercy. This consisted primarily of a good diet and the correct meds, provided in Mercy free of charge by the government. She was not able to go to school, however. She was too weak. Her AIDS was in the advanced stages. Over time, Jupe started periodic visits to the nearby Glue Nam Thai Hospital. It was not advanced, but it would take the poor, and the doctors knew Mercy. Of course, the poor always ended up in an open, quite bleak ward setting of 12 or 16 beds in an open space that resembled a parking garage more than a hospital ward. The hospital didn't advertise AIDS treatment. What hospital would? The care Jupe received was aimed primarily at her increased difficulties in breathing, as the hospital would hook her up to an oxygen tank and ensure she was on the correct AIDS medicines and that she took them fully and on time. As time passed, Jupe began to feel the need more frequent stays in the hospital. I told her I would stop by and visit her. The best time to visit was on a weekend. I would go on a Sunday morning. Jupe loved all such visits. I would ask her what she wanted, and she would recite a list of candies she felt she was in need of. I understood it would be better if she didn't have too many sweets, but I felt my visits amounted to just an occasional indulgence. I would run down to the 7-Eleven convenience store on the ground floor and come back with a small stock of the most desirable items. Jupe was delighted, as she was when any of her vassals performed well. Between Jupe's lack of English and my rudimentary Thai, we sometimes struggled to make proper connections on filling her needs. I remember one visit at Mercy when Jupe was making it clear she wanted something, but I wasn't quite sure what. Then I asked Jupe what the special occasion was, thinking I really should have some limits when it came to running for the item she wanted. It was understood I was a committed vassal, but I felt I couldn't be a lackey. She said it was for her birthday. Well, she had me trumped. I couldn't say no to a birthday wish. So we discussed what month and what day. The day was easily determined, but I wasn't clear on the month when she said it. I prompted her, asking her if it was the current month, July, or Garakada in Thai. She paused, looked at me for a second, and then with a delighted smile said, yes, it's this month, Garakada. What would she like? Some jewelry. The coming birthday would be Jupe's 16th. I guess she felt it was time for a more adult gift. It seems to me that there's nothing worse than a guy shopping for women's jewelry, but I had to try. I asked several of the women on the Mercy staff for advice and finally decided on a neck chain with a small emblem. At the conclusion, I found an inexpensive chain with a small blue dolphin figure. I thought this would be appropriate for a teenage girl. Jupe loved it, and we put it on right away. We were both happy. Of course, I was to find out later that in typical Jupe fashion, she had conned me. Her birthday wasn't in July, it was in October. I had to laugh. Okay, her present was 3 months early, so what? In the following months, Jupe's condition deteriorated. More hospital visits and much lessened energy. When I asked Kun Usni about Jupe's deterioration, she explained that there were 4 stages to the AIDS process, each of increasing severity. Jupe was now in the 4th and final stage. October came, and Jupe was now 16, an important age for any young girl, sweet 16. At the beginning of December, I learned that Jupe was not doing well. She had been in the hospital for a spell and was now back at Mercy. The doctor said there was nothing more they could do for her. The Mercy staff should make her comfortable. Jupe was in her final days. I planned to go visit her after work in the afternoon to comfort her. In the office in the morning, I mentioned to Kunusini I would go to visit Jupe that afternoon. Kunusini advised me not to go. She told me Jupe had gone into hysterics when she was told she would not return to the hospital. Of course, she associated the stays at the hospital as providing care to keep her alive. She was desperate to live and screaming at the staff to take her to the hospital. Kunusini told me 2 of the nursing staff were with her and had given her some sedatives, but Jupe was so agitated that the sedatives weren't taking effect. Despite Kunusini's advice, after the lunch hour, I felt I had to go say goodbye. But it wasn't to be. As I walked into the open courtyard area, I could hear Jupe screaming to go to the hospital. I hesitated, but then started up the staircase leading to the 3rd floor in the area of the AIDS ward where Jupe was staying. When I got to the next landing, I stopped and listened. Jupe was continuously screaming to go to the hospital. I wanted to see her, to hold her hand, but Jupe associated me with the hospital visits. If she saw me, she would have hoped she was to go to the hospital, that she was to live. My appearance would only make things much worse. I agonized over the decision, but Kunusni was right. I turned and went home. That was my last memory of Jupe. At 3 p.m., Kunusni called me to let me know that Jupe had just passed away. She assured me that the staff was washing the body and undertaking the necessary rituals to prepare her for a Buddhist funeral. It was so kind of Usini to call. That was 3 p.m. of December 10, 2006. I always remember that time and date and Jupe. There were 2 more contacts with Jupe. The next day, Usini gave me the chain with the small blue dolphin on it. Jupe had been wearing it when she died, and the staff knew I had given it to her. They gave it to Usini to give back to me. After a few days, we had the Buddhist cremation ceremony at Wat Safan. It was called the Bridge Temple, as it was next to a bridge that passed over a nearby canal. This was where the kids from Mercy who passed away were cremated. The head monk was a very understanding and supportive man, and Father Joe and the staff respected him. Many of the staff were there, as well as Father Joe, Sister Maria, Kunusni, and many of the senior Mercy kids. John McTaggart and I were there from the volunteers who were at Mercy at the time. John was in tears, as was I, though I think I hid mine fairly well. The monks offered those attending the opportunity to go up and view Jupe in the coffin before the cremation took place. All of the kids present went up to see. I kept my seat. One of the Soy 40 girls, Pung, turned back and asked me, "Kuntam, don't you want to see?" I told her I didn't want to see. After the funeral ceremony, the head monk gathered the Mercy kids on the side and gave them a talk. I guess he was explaining how the cremation and funeral ceremonies fit into their religion. I thought it was a timely idea. A teaching moment, as they say, though a grim one. I didn't understand most of the talk, but one of the staff attempted to translate one point that I've never forgotten. This life is an illusion. I took it to mean that for a true Buddhist believer, it's important to remember that this life is just one in a cycle of lives. I believe what he meant is not to be attached to the things of this life, but to keep your eyes turned towards the final enlightenment, after how many lives that takes. I decided I needed to learn much more about the tenets of Buddhism. I knew then what Father Joe meant when he said living with the Buddhists and the Muslims in the slum had made him a better Christian. Jupe's spirit was now released to the next life and the path to enlightenment. I still keep contact with many of the Mercy kids I knew. Most of them are fully grown. At times, I wonder what mischief Jupe would be doing now if she had been allowed to grow to adulthood. I miss you, Jupe.
Wow. Tough story.
A Mercy story.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of them there, but I don't think...
Tom Crowley, this is part 3 of the Roman Anton Podcast. So for part 3, and we're out of sequence, but part 3 we normally go to a spot in Bangkok that means something to the guest.
Okay.
So we are at the Mercy Center. CENTRE?
British funding in Bangkok meant that there's more Brits here than Americans.
Yeah, there we go. So we're at the Mercy Center in Bangkok, Thailand, and you have spent a lot of time here, as we said in our earlier interview. But thanks for bringing us here today. We were able to meet Father Joe walking in the door. That was almost like a planned event, but I know it wasn't. Right?
It's typical. The best place to meet Father Joe is just hang there, and he'll come through sooner or later, telling stories, telling people do this or that. So. Well,
if I haven't said this in the first segment, thank you for your service, right? I mean,
thank you.
Spent some time reading your books this last week, and we'll cover that in the first segment, so we'll go back in that. But Mercy Centers, you spent 14 years here.
Spent 14 years here, and it was the most important 14 years of my life. It's the hallmark, and I was lucky. I was lucky to be accepted here. I was lucky to, be able to help out in a small way, because Mercy is super great, super important. It saves kids, and there's no, as Joe would say, no more hallowed work in life than saving kids.
And so the book that we talked about in the first segment, Mercy's Heroes, is about this and other topics.
Yes.
14 years. It seems like it was written in the last decade or so, and came out last year or the year before, depending on COVID times here. long time to write that book, but there's a lot of concepts in it, right? So it seems like the pinnacle of a lot of different thoughts you've had, huh?
Yeah, I had the ideas, well, when I first came out, and I didn't stop working at Mercy per se, but I stopped coming every day, and I was helping them with writing applications for funding and other things. So I'd be stopping in and out, and people were asking me, well, listen, you've stepped back, why don't you write a book about Mercy? And I wasn't comfortable at first because there's so much going on, there's so much that could be misunderstood. And I thought, no, I'm just going to drop this. But as the years went by, up until 3 years ago, it finally hit me that this story is too great. It's got to be told. And people were coming to me saying, you know, nobody else has spent 14 years plus at Mercy. You know the stories. So then I decided to start it, and then COVID hit.
Right.
And a lot of writers are saying the same thing. Well, COVID, I just locked myself in my office and started cranking. I'd say it took me 2 years to write the book, but the problem was I was also writing Bangkok Gamble at the same time, which I tell people who want to write, never do that. Never write 2 books at the same time, but I was doing it. But I put the spurs on it because actually, like many people with heart conditions, I wanted to get the book out before I died.
Wow.
And that gives you an impetus. Well, I've had 3 what they call heart incidents of different nature, and the last one was, I think, November of 2020, and that took me into 2021 thinking, I got to get to work and I've got to write this. And you know, it takes a lot of time researching and pinning down facts. Kun Nidya, who you met, has been great. Father Joe has been great. When I've gone to them with questions, I remember this child or that child. Is this story correct?
Yeah.
You know.
Well, this is something I want to touch on when we get back to the studio. Your ability to marshal facts is very interesting, and I wanted to sort of make some observations, and hopefully they're not insulting or they're clear or they're helpful. Okay. But it's been really interesting having a Tom Crowley week and reading some books. But back to the Mercy Center. So, walking to and from, getting to and from work. What was your sort of deal when you were here?
It was an adventure. It was number one, as we discussed before. Of course, I wasn't driving. I didn't have a vehicle. I would rent vehicles for what I call outstation excursions, because there's so many wonderful places in Thailand to go outstation. Up north, Chiang Mai, Kanchanaburi I love because of the forest and the fact that I found a tiger track there some years back, which put my hair on end. But otherwise, I was just getting around by taxi and motorcycle. And as we discussed, taxis really didn't want to come down.
Right.
And maybe still they don't want to come down. I don't know. The other morning, I've got an older guy, and older guys are more reasonable. And he said, okay, we'll go. But he was visibly more and more unhappy as we got into it. So motorbikes. I would take a motorbike to either a taxi to Lotat and get the motorbike, or I was taking motorbikes to Klong Tui Talad.
Right.
And because those guys know Mercy, I say Bon Mercy, they would get me here.
Yeah. And so where were you coming from? Where were you living at that point?
I moved around, but I lived near Lumpini Park one time, and then on Soi Ten for a long time.
Okay.
So, you know, those venues were motorbike friendly. I could catch a motorbike and come.
It's interesting though. I mean, so you're getting here from those 2 locations or 3 locations you mentioned. Not a foregone conclusion that can be done quickly.
No, you have to work at it. Yeah, just coming to work was work.
Right, and then you get here.
Yeah.
And it's not, GE country manager South Korea. It's it's a little different than that. And so you had a whole metamorphosis or change coming here and
you have to be committed.
Yeah.
That's what I used to tell volunteers. I said, this looks nice, sounds nice, but you really have to be committed.
Yeah.
It's not easy. So but Mercy rewards you. I mean, not monetarily, but The kids grab you.
Yeah, so obviously if anyone's watching this, donations accepted, mercycenter.com.
Yeah.
Reach out to Tom. He can get you in touch with the folks as well. Probably don't send money to Tom. That's no longer his function anymore.
In the U.S., we have a foundation, which is Mercy Center USA.
Yeah.
And if people donate to that, they get a tax break.
Yeah, right. And there you go, 501c3.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we're keeping tabs on that. That makes sense. For those of you overseas, if you're American making that contribution, run it back through the States and you can deduct or get that contribution. But interesting stuff. You know, I try to think of the various hats you wore since leaving Wisconsin, and we'll talk about that later or earlier. But this was a 14-year period of continued service, so it makes a lot of sense to me now that I've gone through the books. Right? I mean, does it make a lot of sense to you looking back?
Well, you can talk to my wife later, but no, it makes sense to me. But the point you're making, Mick Maloney, my Irish musician friend who we're remembering today,
right,
told my son, he said, "Mike, I've never seen a guy rediscover himself or reinvent himself more than your dad."
Right.
And I told Mike it's because I couldn't keep a job.
There you go. I have a feeling that's not true, but you know, I wonder when that started, right? I mean, there's a couple of sections of Shrapnel Wounds, the book hopefully we'll talk about earlier, but we'll get back to that. So here we are at the Mercy Center. I'm looking at classrooms and an outdoor dining area for the students and the kids who live here, who are being cared for in this institution. We walked back, there's a conference center, and Father Joe's residence is in here, and you've talked to me about that earlier, but this is one of a couple of different setups in the Klung Tory area of Bangkok. And then there are obviously other places where that have indirect connections and teaching affiliations with this.
There's at the current count, it used to be more. There's 15 schools, I believe, through all the slum areas of Bangkok, and so through those schools, for instance, during COVID, we were able to organize the schools, and the government gave food and help, and then the schools, the teachers, whom everybody trusts, were the focal point for distributing food throughout the slum areas. And that was Mercy at its best. In emergencies, Mercy's done extremely well. The tsunami.
Yeah, you're right about that, right?
Yeah. And 2011, we had the big flood.
Right.
And hopefully that's not coming now.
Yeah.
But there were schools that were in neighborhoods that were flooded, and we boated in, to get food and medical care to those schools. So, yeah, the schools are the heart of Mercy. They were the first program. Sister Maria started them, and till today, they're still the first program.
Well, it sounds dramatic, and it is, and it sounds supercharged, and it is. It sounds not difficult, but it is, right? It sounds all of these challenges that you personally have overcome, and that as I've tried to read more and learn more about Mercy is just not an easy gig, but it's the right one, right? I mean, it's in the right direction.
Well, it's the right one, yeah. As your life develops, one thing we can talk about later or at another time is one of the things I've learned about myself going into the military was I've got a bad attitude in a sense. It was good for the military is that I'm a frontline guy. I push. And pushing is good in many circumstances. Maybe not. I don't think I could work in a law firm. You've got to have a sort of a subtle relationship with people. You handle things deftly. And
how about on stage? Grab a guitar? You could do that up front.
No. Mick Maloney put me on stage in New York. We had a concert back in September 2008.
Didn't work?
Well, it didn't work to my satisfaction. Mick said, "Good job." What he wanted me was introduce the backstage people. I'm going to bring Tom up here, and he's going to introduce, and he didn't tell me until 20 minutes before.
There you go.
Which is probably better because I would have been a bit nervous, but so I didn't enjoy that experience. I prefer to be a backstage person.
Sounds like your initial speech to your battalion or your platoon. Platoon.
Yeah.
You didn't give yourself high rankings on that one either. The first time you spoke, right?
Well, As a junior officer, I was an enlisted man for a period of time and went through OCS, and I know how the troops look at officers. And as a junior officer, if you go in with this attitude that I'm great, this is going to make my career, I'm aiming to get this medal or that medal, the troops are going to just say, this guy's going to get us killed. Well, and
I think I'm going to leave it at that, because I think that sums up the Tom Crowley that I've learned about this week. But hopefully we're going to go back to the podcast and do segment 1 later. You brought us here today to Mercy Center. This is it. We'll post the website and stuff. But that's how we do segment 3, Tom, so hopefully we didn't take up too much of your time here, and I know you got some personal stuff to do with the events here today. It's a good friend of yours, the memorial service you just mentioned, so we'll be in the background there and we won't bother you, but thanks again for doing this, and it's been a pleasure meeting you.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thanks.
1, 2, 3, quiet.